Hey there, Solar Warriors. I'm Nico Johnson, and this is SunCast. Each week, I pull back the veil on the life and business insights of clean tech entrepreneurs building the most noble and impactful companies of our time. I hope what you learn from this conversation is a catalyst for your own growth. So thanks for tuning in, and welcome to our tribe. Hey, welcome back, Solar Warrior. It's another Tactical Tuesday, and regardless of what day you're listening, we drop these short-form conversations every Tuesday with subject matter experts designed to give you practical tools, tips, and advice for building your solar business or career. Now, I know I said this is short form, but today we're going to have a little bit of a longer conversation. This is my friend, Dr. Tamika Jacques. She is the Director of Workforce Development for Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and she's also the COO of Fruitful Vision Enterprise. She's been in workforce development for over 18 years and has the honor of assisting with distribution of nearly 30 million in workforce training programs that have targeted women, minorities, college students, youth, unemployed, and underemployed. Dr. Jacques is also the author of A Brown Girl's Guide to Employment and Networking. I was happy to have Dr. Jacques speak to our SunCast Career Summit back in the fall of 2020, and I hope that we'll have a chance to have her back at one of our future career events, and I hope that you'll join us in one of those as well. But for now, let's get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior. We're going a little bit back in time to Dr. Tamika Jacques' presentation on the subject of unconscious bias, how to identify it, how to overcome it.
My name is Tamika Jacques from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. I've been with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center since 2012, so it's been about eight and a half years that I've been with them, and I've enjoyed, every day, every program that has been created, all ways that we are here to change the clean energy industry. I am all for it. So I'm just going to move forward. Since we have short time together, this is what the agenda is going to look like over the next 30, 40 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I'm going to ask you a question to do on your own. I call them quiet voice questions. I'm going to give you some definitions. We're going to talk about some diversity traits, unconscious bias, the effects, the glance at the Massachusetts industry. I'm going to give you a test that you can take. I say a post-test, pre-test, post-test that you can take as we talk about this topic of unconscious bias. We'll talk a little bit about how to move forward. And then at the end, I'm going to ask that all questions be held until the end. And then I don't mind staying on to answer questions. So with that said, I am going to move right along to my first slide, which is who is Tamika Jacques and why is she here? I like to tell this story of, I'd like to open up with a story, should I say, of really how I got to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. As I said, I started in 2012. Prior to that, my work was working on the Massachusetts Investment Board. And during that time, we had received our funds, right? So this was under Obama, and we were working on clean energy. We were working on weatherization. And so when I was being recruited to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, they said to me, we have this great internship program, and, it can be developed out. It has a great budget item. And they were really bragging, about this program. And so I was like, wow, it sounds great. Like, how does it work? And they said, well, we provide internships for students to go work at clean energy companies. We provide the reimbursements to the company. If they take on a student, we will reimburse them. And so, everyone was all excited about the program. And, that's how they recruited me. Like, this is one of the programs that you're going to manage. And so when I came in, the program had taken place during one summer. And I looked at the data, and it had 85 students that had participated that summer. And it was great. I mean, there was press on the program. But when you looked at the data that was lying underneath all the advertisement that the program had received from different press agencies, you could see the data was terrible. Now, what do I mean by terrible? So out of the 85 internships that we had provided that previous summer, 98% of the internships had went to white males from private elite universities. So meaning that the other 2% that were allowed to have an internship were either from a community college, they were from a public college, they were a woman, or they were of minority background. And so when I saw the data, I immediately paused and said, we cannot brag about this internship any longer until we figure out the underlying cause of why 98% of the people that benefited from this internship program were white males from private universities. And so as I began to look at data, that's when I really discovered for myself, not that I didn't know previously, but I really had to break it down for our board of directors, for our agency, how unconscious bias can play into how someone is hired, how they are retained, and how they are promoted, right? So that's a little bit about me, how I started talking about this topic for the past 8 years. And really, it really has been a passion of mine really ever since. So I just want to share that with you, give you some context of why that, I really like talking about this, because the programs that I've created at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center really does try to address the unconscious bias. Okay. So I told you I would give you a few questions. One thing about unconscious bias is it falls under the bucket of diversity and inclusion. And so, if you're going to talk about it, you have to look to see where it fits in an organization. And so I'm going to ask you if you have a piece of paper in front of you, we're not going to really talk about it, but I want you to look at this question. When you hear people refer to diversity and inclusion, do you differentiate between the two? So meaning, is diversity and inclusion, do they have the same definitions, or are they different? So I don't want you to answer per se. You can answer, to yourself, but I just want you to think about that for a second. So I'm just going to pause just for 1 quick minute and think about that. Is diversity and inclusion, do they have different definitions, or are they the same? And when you talk about them in your organization, or, where you're from, do you see them, are they being interchanged as the same definition? I'll give you a second to think about that. All right, so hopefully you have your brain is turning a little bit. The second question is, do you think the same set of initiatives designed to achieve diversity goals allow an organization to achieve inclusion goals? Okay, so there's another question that I would love for you to think about. Again, you're probably saying, Tamika, how does this all relate to unconscious bias? But we will talk about this moving forward, because it does fall under the bucket of diversity, equity, and inclusion, really. But we'll talk about this a little bit. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and then if you have any questions, or we can discuss, this question at the end. So before I get started moving a little forward on, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page of some 4 definitions that I'm going to give to you. Again, we're just going to go over this quickly. So a bias, prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. Right. So, you think of, maybe if you have children, they might say, oh, Mom, you're so biased because, she's the oldest. Right. So we look at that's an example of that. And unconscious bias is stereotypes, prejudice, labels, influence, or what or who we see, assigning all the characteristics or traits to all individuals. And so again, this is when, based on your experiences, things that you've seen in life, things that you've read about, that you've seen on TV, then you start, developing certain prejudices or labels when you see somebody, or you're assigning a trait to somebody. So this is what the focus is today. So we will come back to this definition. And then again, as I said, it's important that, unconscious bias falls under these buckets of diversity and inclusion. So when I asked you in the beginning, the definitions of diversity and inclusion, I just wanted to put those out there because they are very separate. A lot of times we interchange, we say, diversity is inclusion, but it's really not, right? So diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements. What are the elements? Race, gender, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicities. Or inclusion definition is an environment where everyone has an opportunity to fully participate in creating business success and where each person feels valued for his or her distinctive skills, experiences, and perspectives. We call this, a lot of psychologists will say, inclusion is psychological safety, right? How is someone feeling when they're in that environment? Do they feel like they can speak up without it being held against them? And a lot of this, again, falls under, ties into unconscious bias. So we are going to keep moving right along. And I just want to talk about this a little bit because unconscious bias, right? How does it start? Where does it begin? Now, first of all, I want to say that if you are saying, oh, Tamika, I don't have any unconscious biases. Well, first of all, then I'm sorry, you're lying, right? We all have some sort of bias, or we have unconscious bias towards something. So that's the first thing really, is that we really have to be able to say, you know what? I have a bias against something, and I need to find out what it is so that I can keep it in check, so that I can see it when I am going, off track and being biased towards someone. All right. So when we talk about that, remember I mentioned traits. I wanted us to kind of look at some of the traits that are, part of unconscious bias, right? So you have your visible traits, diversity traits that you can see. You can see skin color. You can see physical traits. You can see behaviors. You can see, someone's physical abilities. But what you can't see are the invisible diversity traits, right? You cannot see just by looking to someone, a lot of times, their religion. You can't see if they have military experience. You can't see what their personality is just by looking at them. You do not know their habits. You do not know their sexual orientation. So how does this all play into, unconscious bias? All right. So think about this. Unconscious bias, these traits that are, that we see and we assign when we see these traits, the visible ones, a lot of times we assign what we think about these individuals right away, right? So meaning that, so if someone can mute their phone, or their computer, I'm picking up a lot of background noise. So that would be really helpful. Thank you. I apologize. So what I was saying was, a lot of times, because of our environment, where we have grown up to, around what we've read, how, our parents have been raised, a lot of times we hear things and then we start assigning, when we see those people, how we feel about them, depending on how we were raised, we start assigning different traits to them. Okay. We start assigning different ways that we think they're going to behave. Right. So I like to, give this example. I'm actually going to move on to the next slide, but I like to give this example of, let's say that your favorite color is red and you are a hiring manager, and someone comes dressed to the interview in a red suit. Right. Now, most of us might say, oh, my gosh, they came to the interview in a red suit. But let's say, again, your favorite color is red. So when you have two people that you're interviewing for the position. One is in a red suit, one is in a green suit. Okay, this is just an example. Probably no one would show up to an interview like that. But you have two people that are, one's in a red suit, one's in a green suit, right? Your bias is that you favor the person in the red suit. So what happens on that? Based on, you having that favorite color of red, you're saying, listen, I like red. So I already know that because I like red, I'm a nice person. I can work well, right? So when that person in the red suit comes in to interview, you approach them differently, right? You approach them like, hi, how are you? Very soft, because this person, again, they like red, so they must be like me, right? Versus the person in the green suit, you hate the color green. So when that person comes up to you, automatically your perception is that they don't know how to pick colors, right? They don't necessarily like the same things I do. So when you're interviewing these people, you are going to probably have different personalities with each one. The person in the red, you're going to be a little bit more friendly with, right? The person in the green, you're probably not going to be a little bit more friendly. So what happens because of these automatic traits that you've assigned to someone based on your environment, based on how you are raised, a lot of times that's where your unconscious bias really can come in, because in this situation you're saying, listen, that person dressed in a green suit, so therefore they're probably not like me, they probably won't act like me, we won't get along. But you haven't even learned about them, you haven't even necessarily called a reference on them or seen their work, how great they are. And this is really how unconscious bias works. So what happens a lot of times, as far as like a psychological perspective, when we see others that do not look like us, that are dissimilar, oftentimes we have these expectations of people that are dissimilar to us. We come up with these kind of, off the wall expectations, off the wall perceptions, and then we have these off the wall interactions, right? And so this is how unconscious bias is formed, because you start to get, scared of people that are dissimilar to you. And so what happens is that when that person comes in and talks to you for the job, you've automatically assigned some of those traits that you may not like that we talked about in the previous slide. Some of those traits start coming up and you say, oh, the person in the green, they're probably going to be hard to work with. And you start to push those resumes away or push those people that, like the color green. And they could be great people, but because you don't like the color green, then then you just assume that they're not going to work. They're not going to be able to work at your company. So this is just an example. It's a crazy example with colors, but really this is how unconscious bias happens. This is how, it starts. And when it's left unchecked, that's when it really becomes dangerous, because we start shutting out people that are dissimilar to us. And hence, that's when we talk about diversity, right? That's when we talk about inclusion, because automatically you start assigning traits to people based on your assumptions of them, or based on how you feel that they do not act like you. So again, expectations, what does expectations mean? You're looking forward to how this person would act. So in this color, you already know that person likes red, they're going to be fine, right? That's what you say to yourself. The perception is understanding, this person, probably you're assuming how this person is going to act, because the perception is that they like red. So again, your interaction is, when I talk to them, I'm going to talk to them very, soft. I'm going to approach them soft, right? So all this plays into that unconscious bias piece. And I like to talk about this a little bit, because what happens is when you have this, for example, let's just say you have, you're in a meeting or someone's in a room, and it could be a room full of, for example, let's talk about gender a little bit. It can be a room full of men. And because, the perception is that, she doesn't speak up enough, or, she doesn't speak up enough, so, pass her over for a position. The problem is that the expectations of the men in the room is that she doesn't speak up enough, whereas no one has asked the question, well, why doesn't she speak up enough? Do we always talk over her when she's trying to speak up? And so what happens from that, then she starts getting all these traits assigned to her. She's not aggressive enough. She's not going to do her work because she doesn't speak up, right? So those little traits and bits really play into unconscious bias and how it can play into diversity within the organization, promotion within the organization. So I'd like to just give those examples, and talk a little bit about that as I talk about unconscious bias.
Hey, I know the fact that you are listening to this means that you like to stay ahead of your peers. You like to stay informed. It also means you probably have formed your own opinions. Well, I'd like you to bring those opinions and join my friend Tor, Solar Fred, Valenza, and myself as we host the revival of our great debate series. That's right. We're partnering with North America Smart Energy Week, Road to New Orleans, and bringing you 5 installments of our great solar debate, starting things off on May 26th with residential solar financing, which is the best form for consumers. Leasing, PPAs, or PACE. We have some exciting guests, including the head of policy for Sonova, that are going to join us, and I hope that you will as well. You can find details at mysuncast.com. Check out the banner we have there for the Great Solar Debate. You can also find the event on my own LinkedIn page, linked there as an event. You can find me on LinkedIn or go to mysuncast.com. It's easy. Click on the button, register right there. You don't want to miss it. Put it on your calendars for May 26th, the Great Solar Debate. Hope you'll join us. Back in February, fellow solar warrior Ravi Mickelson revealed in episode 345 that the world's top banks funneled nearly $2 trillion into fossil fuels since the Paris Accord signing, despite their lip service towards climate and renewables. If that gets under your skin as much as it did mine, then let Ravi's fast-growing fintech banking platform, Atmos, help you align your purpose with your pocketbook, your cause with your cash. And you can know that it's never supporting interests or industries misaligned with your personal mission. Start your financial journey at joinatmos.com/Suncast. Hey, by now I'm sure you've probably heard about our mission-minded program, getting your dream job in clean energy in 12 weeks. Our current cohort is giving us great feedback and kudos, I might add, as they go through the material and our coaching calls. You can see more about what this program looks like at suncast.vip. That's our brand spanking new webpage to talk about the mission-minded program. That's also where you can send friends, family, neighbors, colleagues that you know who might need a little extra help, a little guidance to find that dream job in clean energy. Our mission-minded program cohort is ongoing right now. We are taking a waiting list for our next cohort. I'd encourage you to do 2 things. 1, send anyone you know that might be interested. 2, those of you who are so inclined, please go check out suncast.vip and email me, nico@mysuncast.com.
As I mentioned, when we talk about, I'm going to stick to gender diversity. As you can see in Massachusetts, and as you think of the example that we talked about earlier when I was introducing myself and talking about the internship program, again, for those of you that do not know about the demographics, the clean energy demographics in Massachusetts, you can see here some of our numbers. And so we have about 30% of women that are in clean, we have 30% of the clean energy industry are women, okay, versus the 51% that are working women in Massachusetts, right? And so again, this goes back to the beginning when I introduced myself, for the internship program. they were bragging about this program, but we only had 2% women. And why is that? Because unconscious bias can often play into, again, we're talking about unconscious bias is when you are not liking something that's dissimilar to you. Right. So here we have in Massachusetts, we have the clean energy industry. We have all these great companies that are run. I'm looking at gender diversity for a second, that are run by men. Right. And they come from these elite institutions that are in Boston, and they form these companies. And while they are small and startup, oftentimes they will hire someone that looks like them. Right. And so look like them, meaning the person has gone to an elite institution, they finished their degree in 4 years, meaning that they do not want to talk to someone that's gone to a community college. They do not want to talk to someone that has gone to a public institution. And so when I talk to different employers and I'm asking them, why is it that you will not hire a community college student? They tend to say, well, they don't understand what it's like to, work hard, or they don't understand what it's like to have to go through these rigorous academic programs at my institution. And I have to remind them that in most cases, community college students are working and going to school. And so when I start saying, well, most of them also are balancing the work life with the school life, with the family life, right? And I start saying all these traits and all the things that, community college students offer, that's when their eyes kind of open. And I say to them, listen, you have a bias against anyone that is in a public institution or is in a 2-year institution. And so you could see a lot of these numbers in Massachusetts, specifically for the clean energy industry, does reflect a lot around unconscious bias, because we have men that are in charge of these companies, and sometimes some of them, they just refuse to hire women. And then when we talk about it from a race perspective, you can see how unconscious bias also plays into who gets hired. Again, because when you have hiring managers out there, seeing the different resumes come in, they invite people in. Again, remember we talked about perception in the last slide. So if I see on your resume that you went to the same university as I did, again, you don't know anything about me, but just that perception that everyone that went to the same university is going to act like me, they're going to work like me, they're going to dress like me. And that's when we really try to break down unconscious bias, because if we don't, and if you don't keep it in check, again, you will have people at your company that are dissimilar to you, right? And so we see this a lot when you read articles, especially from Forbes, and they talk about the Fortune 500 companies, of all the women, of all the companies, 4%, I believe, are led by women. And you can go check those statistics. So it's like, you need to tell me that there's only 4% out of the 500, CEOs and executive team that we could find to lead these organizations. So you can really see it in some of these companies that are not addressing unconscious bias, that are not addressing diversity, that are not addressing inclusion. And right now, in this country, where we are. You see what's on TV. The various initiatives around, equity, inclusion. We talk, you see Black Lives Matter. We all know what happened with George Floyd. So right now, everyone's ears are open, which is a good thing. It's a great thing, but it's important to realize that it's not just, have your ears open. It's more, what are you doing personally? If you're a hiring manager, or if you're in, that C-suite, what are you doing to make sure that your organization is really not just paying attention and trying to piecemealing, but you're really bringing in training and the proper people to make sure that for your company, and that the unconscious biases are really checked across the board, so that really you can see the diversity in your company come to light. You can see that equity come to light, and you can see that inclusion come to light. Okay. So, again, us talking today, the 30 minutes that we're spending here, the 40 minutes that we're spending here, it's just a conversation. And we're not going to accomplish everything that needs to be accomplished talking about unconscious bias, but I would encourage you to before, you think about bringing or starting conversations at your company or bringing ideas back to your company, I would encourage you to go on this website and take an implicit, bias test, and take 2 of them. I always say take 2 of them. They're free. You just gotta, check off, I consent. No one's going to track you. And I would encourage you to take one of these tests to see where your own unconscious bias is. And one thing that I just want to point out is that when you are taking these tests and you go back and have discussions, at your company, no one is a bad person because they have an unconscious bias, right? Because we all have them. It's really what you do so that you're not having that unconscious bias, and how you move forward, and how you're continually practicing bringing that unconscious bias in check. So I just want to say that, when you take this test and you find out, what it is that you kind of, lean towards of being dissimilar, and it makes you scared, it does not make you a bad person. And I think that's important to know. So I just wanted to say that again, because again, this workshop is just to get your mind thinking. That's all it is. It's not meant to, solve anything today, because that would take continuous process improvement of training. So I just want to, point that out for a few minutes. So I encourage you all to go on this link and, shoot me an email if you want, if, later on, to say, listen, I took the test and, I was very surprised, or, how do we as individuals or company work towards, resolving some of these unconscious biases within our organization. All right. So as we're talking about this, again, this is short. Just wanted to give everyone a little introduction on unconscious bias. I wanted to share with you a best practice, really, because as we talk about unconscious bias and how do we implement it into our organization with your hiring managers, it's not just about hiring managers. It is about, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how does this work, right? How do we incorporate this training? Because I will say that if you have ideas about unconscious bias and you just bring it back to your organization and you do not have the buy-in of your top leaders in the organization around diversity, equity, inclusion, and you want to address some of those unconscious biases around, your hiring, your recruiting, your retention, your promotion, then it simply will not work. Okay. So unconscious bias, as we're talking about it and we want to address it, it really has to start from the top down. And this is just a little slide that I created to show, how it works. So if you look at the right of your screen, you'll see that the top leader of the organization is the face of diversity and inclusion, around the campaign, because, they have the commitment to invest, they have the resources, they know how to lead. So usually this is like the president, the CEO, the CFO, the CPO, that kind of leads this initiative. And what they say is they have, that whether it's campaign, emails to staff, we are going to work on this component, unconscious bias, or we're going to work on our diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is what we're going to do. And so that person communicates the message, and also says that we are going to work on unconscious bias in training, and it's going to be incorporated into performance reviews, right? Because we all know what happens with performance reviews. That's how we get our promotions. That's how we get our raises. That's how we advance in our career. Again, I know it's COVID, so this year, it's pretty unstable, as far as raises, but it really does help as you incorporate unconscious bias training into performance reviews. So once you have the top leader, addressing the situation, the problem of why there's lack of diversity in the organization, why there is, lack of hiring of diverse candidates, gender diverse as well, then, that message is kind of translated to the senior leaders of the organization. So the senior leaders participate in unconscious bias training. They learn how to incorporate it into the performance reviews. And usually people that are leading this are your senior vice presidents, your HR directors, if you have a diversity and inclusion director at your organization. And from there, so now it starts, moving down. And then the lower management, that's when, we call them the middle leaders organization of the organization or the entry level job positions, that's when they also participate in training. There's employee resources that are giving to them, and they also can see how it's implemented into, their performance reviews, right? So as we talk about this unconscious bias, if we're really going to address it within different organizations, it really has to start from the top down to the bottom. It cannot start from, the bottom and then go up to the top. It just will not happen. Everyone has to be on board. This has to be an initiative within the organization, and everyone has to see that this is real. This is not just a company trying to do, a piecemeal, trying to address unconscious bias, or, trying to, answer to the world right now that everything that's happened in the world around, George Floyd, try to come up with this kind of, piecemeal campaign. It really needs to be something that is shown and how it's going to, progress. The benchmarks are set. This is where our organization is. This is where we want to be in a couple of years. Again, because I, remember saying in the beginning that this is not something that you accomplish in one day. It's definitely not something we're going to accomplish, in 30 minutes, but this is something that can be worked on, for the life of the company, right? So with that said, I know I'm probably coming down to my time. I just always like to look at role models for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really companies that have addressed, unconscious bias. And if you go on a lot of these websites, for instance, Deloitte Audit, their company structure, the activities that they have that is open for past, present, and future members of their company, I think is a great example of how they address unconscious bias through, whether they're talking about promotion, whether they're talking about retention of their companies. That's just a great conversation. These are all companies that are great conversation starters. Noresco is a company located in Massachusetts as well. Noresco has employee resource groups around looking at, gender equity for the company, right? And so a lot of that, focuses on unconscious bias. And then again, the other companies are not necessarily in the clean energy industry, but I think that they are definitely examples of, how we can really address our unconscious biases. So I just wanted to give you guys some examples of how you can bring some of these ideas back to your organization. And that was my 30-minute spiel on unconscious bias. So I wanted to say thank you. Again, I have a book out, A Brown Girl's Guide to Employment and Networking. And it really gives it's for everybody really, but it just really gives a focus and a shout out to the brown girls all over the world as we deal with unconscious bias when you go for, an interview or you are trying to network. It just shares some tips on, how you can really make sure that you are building your own network, even if you're an introvert and extrovert, and how we can get around some of those unconscious bias. I also have a Facebook group that has women in the group where we post, jobs. We talk about, the different unconscious biases that we faced. So you can also join there. It's the same title of the book, A Brown Girl's Guide to Employment and Networking. And thank you so much just for listening to my 30-minute ideas about unconscious bias.
Well, that's going to leave you with a lot to think about, I know, Solar Warrior. So while you're thinking, I hope you took notes. I hope that this has been useful for you, not just in your career, but your own personal growth and development. It certainly was for me. I want to thank Tamika once again for being a mentor to our SunCast tribe and for sharing on how to identify and overcome unconscious bias. I hope that you'll check out Tamika's LinkedIn profile, which you can find at the show notes on mysuncast.com. Just click on the show notes tab. That's also where you will find all of the other ways to engage with Tamika and, in fact, the other previous episodes and guests as well. You can find social media links, book recommendations, and so much more. I really hope that you're enjoying SunCast, and if that's true, I'd like you to consider leaving us a rating and review in iTunes or Spotify or wherever it is that you are listening. I'm thanking you once again for listening all the way through the episode. hanging out here with me in what is in the industry known as the outro. I hope that you will take a chance to share this content with others if you thought that it was useful. Certainly this topic in particular might be one that is particularly useful inside your organization, inside your friend group. I'd be honored if you would tag me on LinkedIn. Let me know what you're taking away from it or how we can bring even more content like this or bring better conversations to the community. A special thank you finally to our sponsors who help make this podcast possible and free to you. You can learn more about the sponsors and all of our other opportunities for you to engage with the community by going to that website I've mentioned a couple of times, mysuncast.com. Follow all the links for offers, demos, cool benefits from our partners, and cool ways to engage with activities like our mission-minded program or the SunCast Guild. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.